So, welcome back to Project Blackwood. This is the space where we stop looking at stock tickers as just flashing numbers.
Right.
And we start looking at them as, well, the vital signs of living, breathing, and sometimes dying organizations.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We take the names you see on the sides of skyscrapers and we peel back the layers to see what's actually holding them up.
Or in some cases, what's pulling them down.
Exactly. Today, we're turning our lens on a company that, for better or for worse, it really defines the timeline of American industry.
The Boeing Company.
The Boeing Company.
It is a massive topic. I mean, where do you even start?
It's huge.
And frankly, it's a heavy one. If you're listening to this, you almost certainly have a mental image of Boeing already.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe it's that romantic image, the engineering marvel of the 747, the Queen of the Skies,
Yeah.
the company that helped win World War II and, put humanity on the moon.
But then there's the other side.
Or if you've been paying attention for the last, 10 years, your image is probably very, very different. It's likely a company defined by crisis,
By tragedies.
by groundings, and by just a relentless stream of whistleblower lawsuits.
Exactly. And that contrast, it's not an accident. It's the hook of our entire story today.
It is the story.
We're looking at a cautionary tale. And I think the core question we need to answer is this. How did an entity that was founded on a literal obsession with the nascent science of flight, how did that mutate into a financial instrument where the aircraft itself, the thing they make, seemed to become secondary to the stock price?
It's the core tension of the last 100 years of business history, really. And it's played out on the grandest stage possible.
You can't get much bigger than this.
No. You have the company man ethos, the engineers, the builders, the people who, get grease under their fingernails, colliding head on with the shareholder first model.
Right, the financiers, the optimizers.
The people who view a factory as a liability on a balance sheet. And Boeing is the perfect laboratory to study this collision because the stakes are so ridiculously high.
Their life and death.
Exactly. When a social media company fails, you get a server outage.
Annoying, but that's it.
When an aerospace company fails, the consequences are physical, irreversible, and just tragic.
So let's set the scene for where we are right now. It is early 2026. What does Boeing look like today?
Well, it's interesting.
If you just glance at the headlines, you see some big, reassuring numbers. They got a backlog of, $682 billion?
$682 billion.
That sounds like a company completely in charge of its destiny. That's more money than the GDP of most countries.
It does, but if you look closer, and we will, you see a very, very fragile recovery. You see a company that is still haunted by a decade of cultural failure.
And it's in the middle of this thing that analysts are calling the Great Reintegration.
That backlog, it's a double-edged sword. It's a promise of future revenue, sure, but it's also a burden. It's a list of promises they've made to airlines that they are struggling mightily to keep.
So it's pressure.
Immense pressure. The Boeing of 2026 is an entity that's trying to buy back its soul. They are frantically trying to reverse 20 years of strategic decisions in roughly 20 months.
So to understand how we got to this fragile state in 2026, we have to go back, way back. We need to go to the Pacific Northwest.
1916.
1916. And here's the first surprise for anyone who thinks they know this story. The founder, William E. Boeing, he wasn't an engineer.
No.
He wasn't a pilot by trade. He was a timber industrialist.
Which is actually crucial to the company's DNA.
Yeah.
He incorporated Pacific Aero Products Cup in Seattle on July 15th, 1916. He put up $100,000 of his own money.
A lot of money back then.
Buying 998 of the 1,000 shares. But ask yourself, why Seattle?
Right.
It wasn't for the coffee, and it certainly wasn't for the tech scene, which didn't exist.
It was for the spruce-wood.
It was for the spruce.
Right, because in 1916, we're not talking about carbon fiber or titanium. We are talking about wood and linen.
And William Boeing, being a timber guy, he knew where the best spruce was. It's a supply chain decision right from day one.
That's fascinating.
And this is where we see the foundational mindset. It was practical, it was resource-driven, but remarkably, for 1916, it was also incredibly meritocratic.
How so?
Because William Boeing wasn't an aeronautical genius, and he knew it. He had the humility to hire people who were.
Let's look at the human element here because it really disrupts that narrative of the good old boys club of the early 20th century.
It really does.
In May 1916, he hires Wang Su. He's the first engineer a Chinese graduate of MIT.
In 1916, think about that.
It's unbelievable.
And Wang Su wasn't just a token hire, he was the brain. He designed the Model 2 seaplane.
The first successful product?
It was a product that got the U.S. Navy interested. They ordered 50 of them in 1917. That contract is the only reason Boeing survived the post-WWI market collapse. The company exists today because a timber baron hired a brilliant Chinese engineer to design a plane made of spruce.
And it wasn't just the engineers. You had Rosie Farrar, hired in 1916 to sew the linen wings.
Right.
You had Helen Holcomb, the first female engineer in the drafting department in 1917. It seemed like in those early days, the only thing that mattered was, can you help us fly?
That's the Aero One philosophy right there. Competence over pedigree.
But as companies grow, they tend to consolidate power. And by the late 1920s, Boeing had morphed into something massive.
Yeah, we call this the Imperial Boeing phase.
This is the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. This thing was a beast. I want to make sure people understand the scale of this monopoly.
It's hard to even imagine today.
They owned Pratt & Whitney, so they made the engines.
Yeah.
They owned Boeing, Stearman, and Sikorsky, so they made the airframes.
Okay.
And they owned United Airlines, so they flew the planes.
It was vertical integration in its purest, most aggressive form. They controlled every single link in the value chain.
Unbeatable.
If you bought a ticket on United, you were flying on a Boeing plane with Pratt & Whitney engines. And all the profit went to the same pot. It was an unbeatable business model.
Until the government stepped in.
1934. The Airmail Act.
This is the first major trauma in the company's history.
Absolutely. The government looked at this monopoly and said, absolutely not. They mandated that aircraft manufacturers had to be separate from the airlines.
They forced a breakup.
A complete breakup.
And William Boeing took this personally.
He was disgusted. He felt he had built something great for the country, and the government was tearing it down out of spite. He sold all his shares and left the industry entirely. Never looked back.
But here's the revelation moment, right? The first major pivot point. This breakup is what forged the Boeing engineering culture.
It's the key. Because suddenly, the manufacturing arm, the Boeing Airplane Company, it couldn't rely on United Airlines just buying whatever they built. They had no guaranteed customer.
So they had to actually be better than the competition. They couldn't just lean on the monopoly anymore.
Exactly. To survive the Great Depression as a standalone manufacturer, they had to double down hard on engineering excellence. They couldn't compete on market power. They had to compete on product performance. That trauma created the company man ethos that would define the next 60 years.
And that ethos just exploded during World War II. We talk about the arsenal of democracy, but the numbers are staggering.
They really are.
In 1935, they had 839 employees.
Okay.
By 1944, at the peak of B-17 and B-29 production, they had 75,169.
Wow. From under 1,000 to over 75,000 in less than a decade.
It's an insane ramp-up. They were churning out bombers on the Duwamish River. This cemented the idea that Boeing was more than a company, it was a national institution.
And that carried over into the jet age. The slogan was working together. And it wasn't just marketing fluff, it was a description of how they operated. The engineers ran the show.
Which leads us to, I think, maybe the biggest gamble in corporate history.
It has to be up there.
The 747, the jumbo jet.
Mid-1960s. This is the absolute epitome of the engineering at any cost mindset. They decided to build a plane twice the size of anything else flying.
Just a monumental task.
But here's the kicker, the part that sounds insane to a modern MBA.
What's that?
They started building the factory in Everett, Washington, the largest building in the world by volume, before they'd even finished designing the plane.
That is just insane confidence or arrogance or a mix of both.
It's both. But it shows you where the priority was. The product came first. The financial risk was existential.
If the 747 failed,
Boeing went bankrupt. There was no plan B. But they believed that if they built the best product, the money would follow. They were betting the entire farm on their own competence.
and for a long time, they were right.
For a very long time.
But trees don't grow to the sky, and engineering booms don't last forever. We have to talk about the hangover, the Boeing bust of 1969 to 1971.
This is the turning point, part 2 of our story. This is the crack in the armor.
So the 747 was a technical triumph, but it was incredibly expensive to develop.
Right, and at the same time, you had a global recession, and then Congress canceled the supersonic transport, the SST program. It was a perfect storm.
The workforce in Seattle was just decimated.
That was a bloodbath.
They went from over 100,000 employees
Over 100,000.
down to 38,690 in 1971. That is a 60% cut.
60%. And that gave us that infamous billboard near SeaTac Airport.
Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights?
That image is just seared into the local history.
But let's look at the psychology here. What did that trauma do to the leadership that survived it?
It planted a deep, deep seed of fear. The engineering at any cost mentality had almost killed the company. The new generation of executives who came up after the bust, they looked at the 747 gamble not as a triumph,
But as a brush with death.
as a near-death experience they never, ever wanted to repeat. They started looking for stability. They wanted to smooth out the boom and bust cycles.
And in the corporate world, smoothing out the cycles usually means one thing.
Diversification.
And mergers.
And mergers. They didn't want to be reliant solely on commercial jets, which are cyclical. They wanted steady government contracts, defense, space, reliable cash flow that didn't depend on the whims of the economy.
So fast forward to 1996. Boeing acquires Rockwell's aerospace and defense units.
A huge deal, over $3 billion. It brought them the B-1B Lancer bomber and the space shuttle fleet. It made Boeing a massive defense contractor overnight. But that was just the appetizer.
The main course was 1997, the merger with McDonald Douglas, $13 billion.
This is the moment. If you are looking for the precise point where the company man died and the shareholder-first model took over, it's August 1997.
Here's the thing that's always confused me. On paper, Boeing was the buyer. They were the bigger, more successful company. McDonnell Douglas was struggling.
Right.
So why do people call it a cultural hostile takeover by the loser?
Because of the people. Because of the leadership that took over. Harry Stonecipher, the CEO of McDonnell Douglas, he became a dominant figure in the new Boeing. And his philosophy was explicitly different. He is on the record saying he wanted to change the culture, so Boeing would be run like a business rather than a great engineering firm.
Run like a business. That sounds innocent enough, almost responsible, doesn't it?
It does on the surface. But in this context, it was a declaration of war on the engineering culture that had built the company.
What did it mean in practice?
It meant that financial metrics, specifically something called return on net assets, or RONA, became the primary language, the only language that mattered.
Okay, hold on. You mentioned return on net assets, RONA. We hear that term thrown around in business schools, but pull that thread for us.
Yeah.
Why did that specific metric kill the engineering culture?
Okay, this is really the key to understanding the next 20 years. RONA is a ratio. It's net income divided by net assets.
That's simple enough.
So to get a higher score and a bigger executive bonus, you have two choices. You can increase the numerator, make better planes, and sell more of them.
That's the hard way.
That's very hard.
Yeah.
That takes 10 years of R&D and billions of dollars of investment.
Wow.
Or you can manipulate the denominator. You reduce your assets.
You sell the factories. You lease the machinery. You outsource the design and the manufacturing. If you get rid of a billion-dollar factory, your assets go down, so your RONA goes up, even if you aren't actually making any more money.
It's a magic trick. You look more profitable by owning less of your own business.
Precisely. Wall Street cheers, the stock pops, and the executives cash out their bonuses. Harry Stonecipher didn't just hate the engineering culture, he loved RONA. And you can't have high RONA if you're sitting on massive, expensive factories in Seattle.
That math is what drove everything.
It's what drove the decision to sell the fuselage plant in Wichita later on. It wasn't about making better planes, it was about optimizing a ratio on a spreadsheet in Chicago.
And nothing symbolized this shift more than the decision in 2001 to move the corporate headquarters from Seattle to Chicago.
A symbolic death blow. They moved the suits halfway across the country, away from the factories, away from the engineers.
But why Chicago? It's not exactly an aerospace hub. It was a deliberate severance. They wanted to physically separate the strategic decision makers from what they saw as an emotional attachment to the product. They explicitly said they didn't want the executives looking out the window at the planes.
That's chilling.
The old working together slogan was quietly replaced by a new mantra.
More with less.
More with less.
And more with less leads us straight into the 2000s and the era of de-verticalization. This is part 3 of our deep dive.
This is where the financial engineering really ramps up. The new philosophy was that Boeing shouldn't actually build planes.
What?
That's messy, that's capital intensive, it's bad for RONA. Instead, Boeing should be a systems integrator.
Explain that. What does a systems integrator do?
Think of it like Lego. They design the concept, they market the brand, and they snap together the final pieces in Everett or Renton.
But the actual manufacturing of the components.
You outsource that. You get suppliers to build the wings, the fuselage, the landing gear. You shift the development cost and the risk to them.
And the ultimate expression of this was a deal in 2005 that, in hindsight, looks absolutely baffling.
The sale of the Wichita division.
This is the revelation moment for this era, isn't it?
It's the moment the whole strategy crystallized. In 2005, Boeing took its factory in Wichita, Kansas, and also operations in Oklahoma, and sold them to a private equity firm, Onyx Corporation.
Let's just pause on that. This was the factory that built the fuselage for the 737, the metal tube that passengers sit in.
The primary structure of their best-selling product.
They sold their own body shop.
It's worse than that. Wichita wasn't just a factory. It was a repository of tribal knowledge. These were guys whose fathers and grandfathers had built B-29s there.
Generations of expertise.
When Boeing sold that to Onyx, a private equity firm, they didn't just sell the building. They severed the neural link between the design engineers in Seattle and the build engineers in Kansas.
And private equity, by definition, is going to look for efficiencies.
Aggressively. They sold it for about $1.2 billion, $900 million in cash, plus some debt assumption. That new company became Spirit AeroSystems. And suddenly, Spirit had to make a profit on every single fuselage. So they cut costs. They reduced headcount.
And crucially, the contract between Boeing and Spirit became adversarial.
Exactly. It was a fixed-price contract. Boeing said, we will pay you X million dollars for every ship set.
Yeah.
If Spirit's costs went up, say because aluminum got expensive or they needed more labor.
So Spirit ate the loss.
Spirit ate the loss. So Spirit is incentivized to cut corners, to stay profitable, and Boeing is incentivized to squeeze them on price.
And in the middle of that financial tug-of-war is the quality of the aircraft.
Right. When you squeeze a supplier that hard, eventually things break.
Yeah.
In this case, it was the process, the discipline, the quality control. This is how you end up with something called traveled work.
Define that for us. Traveled work. It sounds like a vacation, but I assume it's not.
It's a cancer in manufacturing. Ideally, you fix a problem where it happens at the factory in Wichita. But if Spirit is behind schedule and terrified of late penalties, they ship the fuselage to Seattle with the defects still in it.
Oh.
Planning to have someone else fix them later.
So now you have Boeing mechanics in Renton trying to crawl inside a nearly finished fuselage to drill holes or fix rivets that should have been done correctly in Kansas.
Exactly. And that is where the mistakes happen. That is where bolts get left out. That is where door plugs get installed incorrectly. It's the inevitable result of that 2005 decision.
And while they were selling off the metal bending, as they called it, they were buying up other things.
High-margin services. They bought Hughes Space and Communications in 2000 for nearly $4 billion. They bought Aviol in 2006 to get into parts distribution. They bought KLX in 2018 for over $4 billion.
I see the pattern. Sell the low-margin manufacturing, buy the high-margin services. It's a classic Wall Street play.
It is. And if you look at the stock price during this period, it worked. Wall Street loved it. Margins went up. Cash flow went into stock buybacks instead of R&D. But while they were financializing the balance sheet, the engineering rot was spreading.
Which brings us to part 4, the collapse, 2018 to 2024. The bill finally comes due.
It starts with the 737 MAX. And we need to be very, very clear here. The MAX crisis was not caused by a software bug. It was caused by a business decision.
The decision to re-engine a 1960s airframe instead of building a new plane from scratch.
Right. Airbus had launched the A320neo, which was more fuel efficient. Boeing was caught flat-footed. They needed a competitor, and they needed it fast.
A clean sheet design, a brand new plane would take 10 years and billions of dollars.
Money they had spent on buybacks. So putting new, bigger engines on the old 737 would be faster and cheaper.
Hold on, I want to stop you there because this re-engining concept sounds simple, but physically, it was a nightmare.
A total nightmare.
You're telling me they took a plane designed in the 1960s, which sits very low to the ground, so baggage handlers could load it by hand, and tried to strap massive modern jet engines to it.
It's like trying to fit a V8 engine into a classic Mini Cooper. It just doesn't fit.
So where did they put them?
They had to mount the engines further forward and higher up on the wing, but that created a fundamental physics problem. When the pilots throttled up, that new position caused the nose of the plane to pitch up naturally.
The plane wants to do a wheelie.
Essentially, yes, a lethal wheelie.
Yeah.
And instead of redesigning the airframe to thwart the physics, which would cost billions,
And delay the program.
they said, let's just write some code to push the nose down automatically if it gets too high. That code was MCS.
So they used software to patch a hardware problem. That feels incredibly risky for a machine moving at 500 miles per hour.
And the constraints were purely financial. They wanted to avoid simulator training for pilots because that cost airlines money. If they could convince regulators that the Mac flew just like the old 737, they had a huge competitive advantage. So they hid MCS. They downplayed it. They told pilots it wasn't a new system.
And this is where those internal emails come in, leaked in 2020. They are just devastating.
They are the smoking gun of the culture change. You have employees writing, "This plane is designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys."
Well, and supervised by monkeys. That is dark humor, but it reveals a total lack of respect for leadership.
And it gets worse. You have technical pilots bragging about using Jedi mind tricks to convince regulators that simulator training wasn't needed.
Wow.
The goal wasn't safety. The goal was compliance and cost avoidance.
We all know the tragedy that followed. 2 crashes. Lion Air, Ethiopian Airlines, 346 lives lost. But from a Project Blackwood perspective, let's look at the financial impact. The data to drama.
It's catastrophic. In 2018, just before the second crash, Boeing had $101 billion in revenue and over $10 billion in profit.
A money printing machine.
By 2020, revenue collapsed to $58 billion, and they lost nearly $12 billion.
They went from a $10 billion profit to a $12 billion loss.
A $22 billion swing. And to survive the groundings and the pandemic, their long-term debt exploded. It doubled to over $50 billion. They had to borrow massive amounts of money just to keep the lights on.
Because they had spent the previous decade using their cash for stock buybacks instead of building a rainy day fund or, a new airplane.
Exactly.
And just when they thought they were clawing their way back, January 2024, the Alaska Airlines door plug.
The plug blows out in midair.
A terrifying incident. And who built that door plug assembly?
Spirit Aerosystems.
The company they sold off in 2005.
The chicken's coming home to roost.
The systems integrator model collapsed right there in the cabin of that 737. It became undeniably clear that you cannot manage quality by contract. If you don't own the factory, you don't own the product.
This forces the U-turn, Part V, the Great Reintegration,
Yeah.
2024 to 2026.
A desperate, and I mean desperate, strategic reversal.
On June 30th, 2024, Boeing announced they were buying Spirit Aerosystems back.
Okay, let's look at the math on this because it is painful. They sold it for about $1.2 billion in 2005. What did they pay to get it back?
The equity value was $4.7 billion, but the total enterprise value, including the debt Spirit had racked up over the years, was about $8.3 billion.
So sell low, buy high.
Buy back extremely high. They paid billions to reacquire a capability they never should have sold just to fix the mess that the sale created 20 years earlier.
Was it a clean deal?
Not at all. To get it approved by regulators, they had to carve up Spirit. Spirit was doing work for Airbus too, remember?
Right, because Spirit was supposed to be an independent vendor.
So Boeing had to arrange to sell the Airbus work, the A220 and A350 programs, to Airbus. They basically had to dismantle Spirit just to swallow the part they needed.
And now we are in early 2026. What is the state of the union? We mentioned the fragile recovery.
The financials for 2025 look deceptive. If you just look at the headline, revenue was $89.5 billion, up 34%. Net income was $2.2 billion. You might think, great, they're profitable again.
But there's always a but.
The but is that the profit includes a $9.6 billion one-time gain from divesting their digital aviation solutions business.
Wait, so without that one-time sale of assets, they would have lost?
They would have lost over $7 billion. The core manufacturing business, the business of making planes, is still bleeding money. Operating margins are thin or negative.
So they are selling the furniture to pay the mortgage.
Essentially. They sold a promising future tech business to pay down debt from past mistakes and make the numbers look acceptable for a year. But the real problem is human capital.
The engineers.
We call it the lost generation. During the more with less era, they drove out experienced engineers and stopped hiring and training efficiently. Now, reports suggest that 3/4 of their engineering teams are near retirement.
3/4.
The institutional memory, the people who knew how to design a plane from scratch, was severed. The young engineers coming in are entering what employee forums call a toxic culture with archaic tech.
So they bought back the factories, but they might have lost the wisdom that made them work.
That is the $8 billion risk. You can buy machinery, you can buy back Spirit, but you cannot simply buy back a culture of excellence that you spent 20 years dismantling.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the arc from the timber baron to the systems integrator and back again.
The lesson, I think, is that efficiency is efficient until it isn't. The pursuit of asset-light manufacturing in a heavy industry like aerospace turned out to be the heaviest liability of all.
It's the paradox of optimization. If you optimize for short-term financial return, you introduce long-term catastrophic fragility.
Exactly. Every decision selling Wichita, the McDonald Douglas merger, the Max shortcuts, it made sense on a spreadsheet for the next quarter.
Sure.
But cumulatively, they destroyed the company's foundation.
I want to throw a what if out there, counterfactual. What if that 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas never happened?
Oh, that's the great question. If Boeing had remained standalone, it's
Yeah.
fascinating to think about. They might have remained smaller, more focused.
No huge defense.
Maybe not. But they likely would have retained that engineering purity. They probably would have launched a clean sheet replacement for the 737 in 2012 instead of re-engining it. We might never have had the MAX crisis. The world of aviation could look very different.
But we live in the reality of 2026, and Boeing is no longer the undisputed titan.
No, it is a survivor,
Yeah.
a wounded one. It has a massive mortgage in the form of debt. It is trying to relearn skills it forgot 20 years ago, while its main competitor is stronger than ever.
And it leaves us with a final question for you, the listener. We often talk about companies selling their soul to Wall Street as a metaphor.
Right.
But the question Boeing forces us to ask is, can you buy it back? And if so, at what price?
The next decade of flight depends on the answer to that question.
That's it for this deep dive from Project Blackwood. We'll see you next time as we decode another industrial giant.
Stay curious.
And check your sources. Goodbye.